She's a girl who loved a man. A man who, in a flash, became a living threat to humanity. A danger so awe-inspiring that they tried to hide his existence from the world.
What happened? What made him grow?
Glen Manning is growing from 8 to 10 feet a day. At the moment, he's 18 feet tall. Tomorrow, he'll be 26 feet. The next day, 35, maybe 40, and the next day...
But you've got to stop it.
Day and night, scientists search, trying every experiment their brilliant minds can conceive, finding the expected, the unexpected, and the shocking. For the immeasurable power of this ever-growing mammoth portends a fate that terrifies the universe.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
They're going to kiss me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, Doctor, help me.
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that hurts!
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're going to make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Welcome to this amazing, colossal episode of the American International Podcast. I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot. Why'd you call it amazing and colossal, Jeff?
Well, if you haven't guessed, today we're talking about The Amazing Colossal Man from 1957, directed by Bert I. Gordon.
Oh, Mr. Big himself.
Mr. Big, yes.
Well, let's get into it. In addition to directing, Bert I. Gordon produced this movie, and it was written by Mark Hanna along with Bert I. Gordon and the uncredited George Worthing Yates, which sounds like a fake name. It's based on a book called The Nth Man by Homer Eon Flint. What a perfect sci-fi name. And it has music by the one and only Albert Glasser and special effects by Paul Blaisdell.
Albert Glasser did the scores for a few other AIP movies, including Viking Women and the Sea Serpent, Teenage Caveman, and War of the Colossal Beast.
And Paul Blaisdell did special effects for The Beast with 1 Million Eyes, The Day the World Ended, and It Conquered the World.
Among others.
Yeah, well, this movie stars Glen Langan as Lieutenant Colonel Glen Manning, Cathy Downs as Carol Forrest, William Hudson as Dr. Paul Linstrom, Larry Thor as Major Eric Coulter, M.D., James Seay as Colonel Hallock, and that's pretty much it from the main cast.
So let's talk about this movie.
Yes, let's. We open up on the road. We see some army trucks heading in a particular direction, and the voiceover tells us that there's a bomb test coming up.
It's 2:45 p.m., and we're 2 hours and 15 minutes before time zero.
Right, which is the explosion time.
And we're in Desert Rock, Nevada. And the explosion is going to be a test of a plutonium bomb.
Which they claim this will be the first time they've ever detonated a plutonium bomb. But as every goof section on a movie site will tell you, that's not true. Actually, one of the bombs that ended World War II was a plutonium bomb, the one that leveled Nagasaki.
So we're introduced to Glen Manning. He's in a bunker with other soldiers, and they're getting ready for this bomb detonation.
What do you think they're doing down there, Jeff? Like, what's the purpose of them being there?
It doesn't seem like it's a good idea. They're about to detonate this bomb. And they're just...
There's nothing to protect them except some dark glasses.
They have their dark glasses. And I mean, I guess the rays are going to go above them because they're
in
kind
a
of
trench.
underground. Yeah.
So. It looks like they're in a foxhole or something. Yeah, so they basically sit there while the countdown happens, and then it goes to zero, and then it's just silence. Yeah, and you're thinking, wow, is this bomb a dud or what? But apparently they just got their calculations wrong, and the bomb is going to explode. They just don't know precisely when.
So they're told, keep your dark glasses on and stay where you are.
Well, that's not going to happen. But something does happen.
There's a civilian plane flying overhead.
Yeah, what a gross miscalculation. The plane crashes into somewhere in the bomb radius, and Glen sees it.
Doesn't even look like a real plane.
It's just
plainly
like,
a model.
Yeah, it looks like it was made of balsa wood and hot and glue. So the plane crashes, it tips, ass over tea kettle, and Glen is...
that crash is just amazing because it kind of just... it comes in for a landing and then does kind of a somersault, and that's it. I mean, if a plane were to actually crash like that, assuming that there was a cover to the pilot area, you wouldn't expect there to be any injuries as long as that pilot was strapped in.
Yeah, it just gently sort of flops over. It doesn't seem to be like a really serious crash.
It's not your typical movie plane crash.
Well, it doesn't explode. Like all crashes in movies lead to a huge fireball, and this one does not. So Glen sees that from his vantage point of wearing, blackout glasses in a trench, and decides that something has to be done because this guy could still be alive. He runs out of the trench, even though he's ordered not to, and all of a sudden everything goes deadly silent, and he realizes, oh no, the explosion is going to happen, and I have no protection.
He didn't even have his dark glasses on at this point.
No, what a maroon.
So the bomb goes off, and it blasts off his clothes and his hair, burns him severely.
Luckily, he throws his hands over, or his arms over his face, so he's spared at least a little bit of the blast.
And his eyebrows.
Yeah, his eyebrows, but that's the only hair that he gets to keep. So yeah, the blast blows him, clean out of his clothes, basically fries him. He looks like a turnover from McDonald's.
So we cut to what we assume is a hospital, and it looks like there's a man in surgery who we can assume is Glen Manning.
He's pretty covered up. Every once in a while, they'll reveal a little bit of his, meaty-looking skin and dab at it with their gauze or something. The surgeon is pretty... he's not very hopeful for Glen, because this is a serious burn. He's basically got 5% of his skin left.
In the waiting room, we see a woman who asks a nurse about his condition, and she just shakes her head.
Yeah, that's not good news. She's off getting blood, and Carol, the woman in the waiting room, interrupts her in her mission to get blood to this severely injured man, just to ask what's going on, and she doesn't get an answer anyways. So she sits back down, but she's soon joined by...
Mr. Sensitivity.
Yeah, Mr. Sensitivity. Well, it's the press, and they need to know what happened.
I know, but what does he think she's doing there? Does he think she's with the press as well?
Yeah, because he's just kind of like, whoa, can you believe that dude got blowed up? And she's like, he's my fiance. And
well, I mean, she's obviously a civilian.
Yeah, she's wearing heels and pearls, and she's dressed for a tea party, not military operation.
But he's just talking about this incident and just how unbelievable it is with...
And what a mess the poor guy is in surgery. And so, then he sees that this is kind of distressing for her to hear. And she tells him that she's his fiance. And then he's like, oh, wow, can I get you anything? Too little, too late. And I think he's subtly trying to get the dirt on what happened from her here, though. But she's actually asking him questions because he was there. He saw what happened.
Right. And she starts confiding in him anyway.
Yeah, they were to be married in Vegas that night. So much for the honeymoon. And, she tells him how they met, which, would it be ironic to say it was another accident? They met having a fender bender and their bumpers got entwined. So romantic. So back into the operating room where Dr. Linstrom, that's his name, is finishing up his treatment of Glen. Basically, Linstrom says that there's no hope. He's going to die of shock or infection that night. There's not even a square inch of skin left on his body. They can only wait.
And he steps out into the waiting room where Carol is waiting in the waiting room. She's waiting in the waiting room, as one does. And she asks him, how's he going to be? Is Glen going to be all right? And he says, I wish I could give you some hope. And then he walks away. So that's his bedside manner at work.
Yeah, sorry, lady. Sucks to be you.
And we see Glen is covered in bandages.
Well, they have him in kind of like this tent situation where he's covered up. I guess that's to help prevent infection.
The next morning, I guess, the nurse checks on him and immediately calls for the doctor.
We don't know why yet, but something has really upset her.
So whatever these doctors were doing was... They were moving furniture or something because there's a lot of clutter, a lot of noise as they rush into the room to see what's going on.
They start cutting his bandages away.
And Carol comes in at this point.
Yeah, because she's probably been out there all night, sitting on the uncomfortable waiting room chair.
And says, his skin, it's not burned. He's going to be all right, isn't he?
But they're too stunned because this should not have happened. There's no medical precedent for this.
No, people do not recover from burns that severe.
No, it's just scar tissue and probably death. That's what should have happened.
So they're trying to determine an explanation for how Glen's skin healed.
Yeah, they want to know for science, basically, because this, could be a breakthrough for future burn victims.
Was it an aspect of the plutonium blast itself, or is this just a freak of nature? Is there something
act of God
different about Glen that they could exploit for other patients?
Yeah, you definitely know exploitation is on the table here, along with Glen. They ask an expert in, I guess, plutonium bomb creation, and he's, pretty blasé about it. It's like, well, who knows? Who could say?
Well, it is. And, he shows them a cool movie. They bring out the projector. And,
this is fun.
And they watch buildings get destroyed by plutonium blasts. And what happens is that they first burn, and then they just get blown away.
Right. So first, everything inside the structure gets incinerated, and then it gets destroyed by the blast.
And we see this several times with several different buildings, and it's all basically the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, it is some fun Army stock footage, though. And then we see what happens to Glen.
Yeah, because there were cameras rolling, so we get to watch the scene that we already saw projected onto another screen.
Bert I. Gordon used the same camera that the Army used.
And because of this incident and Glen's healing, there's only one conclusion to be drawn, and that is something out there is beyond the limits of our knowledge.
Yeah, they're not very curious, these scientists. They're like,
it's the only rational explanation that we don't understand.
Yep, and we never will, so stop asking.
A little bit later, Carol's answering the door at, I assume, her home.
No, I think she's probably at a hotel or something. Or maybe they found her like a barracks or something to sleep in. She wouldn't have gone home.
Home might be the barracks because they're not married yet.
No, they're not.
And it's the 50s, so I guess.
Barracks are for the whole Army, not just for one person.
Well, no, but if he's a lieutenant colonel, which he is, he might have his own residence.
Maybe. Well, wherever she is, she's handy. She's somewhere on the same site as the hospital. Well, anyway, they wake her up and tell her that she's not allowed to visit anymore, but they won't say why. And she's, of course, very upset. She's always asking, why? Why can't I do this? Why can't they do that?
She's not in the Army, so she doesn't have to follow orders. No, so she heads directly to the hospital.
As you would expect her to. Like they must have told her that just knowing that was going to make her come. But when she gets there, they're acting like nothing ever happened, and Glen Manning doesn't even exist.
Yeah,
There's no record of him.
She goes to his room, it's empty, and she starts asking around. And
he's not on the books as being a patient. They tell her maybe she's mistaken and he was in a different hospital. So they're kind of gaslighting her at this point.
And she asks about Dr. Linstrom specifically and learns that he came in from Rochester as a specialist.
Rochester, what state? It's kind of like Springfield, isn't it? It could be anywhere.
I assume it's Nevada because the whole movie takes place in Nevada.
Right. But once the person at the desk disappears, she goes full Nancy Drew, starts rifling through some papers and finds out where Dr. Lindstrom's home base is at the Nevada Rehabilitation and Research Center. So off she goes.
And they stop her at the gate. And she says she's there to see Glen. And they say that he's not there. But the guard makes a call inside and they agree to see her.
Yeah, that's really surprising. I thought they would send her away. Usually the Army sends away civilians and other busybodies because it's none of their beeswax what's going on in there, and they're not going to want that to get out.
Are you saying this movie might be a tad unrealistic?
I'm saying perhaps Bert I. Gordon doesn't really know how military security works.
So Carol goes in. The desk has no record of a Colonel Manning. And she goes through and starts opening doors randomly.
Yeah, once she's unobserved. So they're sending her off, but she's not going anywhere. And she never goes anywhere. She's always on the case.
But while she's wandering around, she sees Dr. Linstrom, and so she follows him.
Yeah, first she hears him, and then she kind of sneaks around to the room that he came out of. And once she's in the clear, she goes into that room where she sees, dun, dun, dun.
Glen is there on a really, really big mattress.
Because he's really, really big. He's like about 16 feet tall at this point, I think, per the movie.
So that's a really big room that he's in because there's room to spare. I mean, he could sit up. He can't stand, obviously, but...
Well, he's not sitting up yet. He's kind of just out of it.
But he can sit up.
He could sit up.
Maybe not full straight, but he can lean forward a little bit.
He can't stand up.
There's a little chest of drawers next to him.
Some tiny little chairs, a little pitcher of water. It's kind of cute. It's like little dollhouse furniture.
Well, this is not what Carol expected to see.
Yeah, she's really shocked.
She screams and she faints.
When she comes to, the doctors tell her that Glen is growing 8 to 10 feet a day, and she tells them to stop it. And of course, they would if they could, but so they kind of mansplain cellular regeneration to her.
This is an interesting scientific theory here. The idea is that the cells are reproducing, but the old cells aren't dying. And so with all these extra cells are causing him to grow. Right.
And it's unstoppable.
Is that what would happen?
Oh.
Wouldn't you just, I guess you get thicker.
Yeah, I mean, he's still like the same body shape and type.
Yeah, I was just thinking it'd be more dense.
His brain would be getting bigger too, wouldn't it?
I don't think it does in this because, as we'll see, he kind of loses his mental facilities.
It affects him mentally, that's for sure. But the gist of it all is that Glen is going to keep growing until he dies. They don't sugarcoat things for her, do they? So back at Glen's bed, he's still in a daze. He's still out of it, but he's having flashbacks.
We see when he enlisted to go to the Korean War.
Right. Well, he's with Carol. It's when they were first dating, or back when they were just dating. And
they're talking about him enlisting, and she's not happy with his choice.
No, because it was a choice. He didn't have to go. And then we see a scene where he's sort of on the ground in Korea. His squad gets attacked. One guy gets knifed in the back, and then he has to kill the guy who did it.
He shoots him in the face.
Yeah, right in the eye hole.
Then there's a parade.
Yeah, because he's coming home. So it's welcome home, the returning soldiers.
And then he flashes back to time 0 in the blast.
And we see that scene for the 3rd time.
And then Glen finally awakens and finds he's living in a doll's house.
Yeah, and he's understandably confused and upset. He plays with the little chair and the little thing of water and the little telephone.
And he shows that he feels a little claustrophobic in this environment.
Well, who wouldn't?
And he screams.
He doesn't really get upset until he puts his hands on top of his head and he realizes he's bald. And that's when he screams.
So the doctors are hoping that Carol's presence will have a calming effect and be beneficial to Glen's recovery.
Yeah, no. They're ordering a circus tent for Glen to move into because this room is obviously not going to be. Okay, well, I have a question. It's a normal-sized door into this room. So how are they going to get him out through this normal-sized door? I guess we don't have to worry about that. It's not going to come up.
This is a really large room. So maybe it was built as an addition to this existing building.
Maybe it's an airplane hangar.
And there's like a removable wall because
could be. Or
they would have had to know that he was growing to begin with.
That's why they brought him there, because something started happening. We don't see this. That happens off screen. And
if they don't expect it to stop, they would have to plan for this contingency. Because any room that he's in, he's obviously not going to be in for very long if he's going to continue to grow until he dies.
Right. So I guess we have to give the army a little credit here. She tries to reassure him, but he asks, this is a key question, what sin could a man commit in a single lifetime to bring this upon himself?
Fade to black. So outside the facility, we're back at the gate, and there's a meat delivery.
This guy's kind of a character.
Delivery guy asks about the tent.
Wants to know why they need so much meat all of a sudden.
And they're very accommodating because they just tell him, but there's a 30-foot giant. That's what the meat's for. That's who's living in the tent.
And as you can expect, the guy's like, yeah, right. And he just delivers the meat.
We cut to a newscast. This newscast has a sign on his desk that says H. Wells.
Yes, obvious nod to H.G. Wells, who wrote such, I think he wrote Food of the Gods.
He wrote Food of the Gods, which Bert I. Gordon would later direct for AIP.
Right.
And is a story about
big things.
Big things, yes. So,
small things getting big.
So this is an obvious wink to that.
Right. According to H. Wells, the newscaster, everyone wants to know what happened to Glen Manning, which makes me wonder, how does anyone know what happened on a secret bombing test site?
Yeah, this seems to be more public than... I mean, does Carol just have a big mouth?
Well, probably, but they're not letting her off the facility, so she doesn't really have an opportunity to inform the media of what's going on.
Well, she was not allowed on the facility until she just walked in.
That's true.
So she would have had an opportunity. I don't know if she would have had any motivation to do so.
Yeah, she's really more interested in getting Glen better. She's not really trying to...
Unless she did it on the way to the rehabilitation center, because having the public word out might help her in her quest to find Glen.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I think we're looking deeper than we need to.
True. So according to H. Wells, eyewitnesses reported to the news about the accident. So maybe some of the other soldiers...
Well, there was press there.
Oh, that's right. There was press there. I guess that's probably...
Okay, well, that's the answer to the question.
Wow, why didn't I catch that the first 5 times I watched this?
Oh, we had to talk it through, Cheryl.
Okay. So they're back at the rehabilitation facility, has a lab. In there, Major Coulter and Dr. Linstrom, it's mostly Major Coulter, is working on a cure. And he's testing everything on guinea pigs and rabbits and other small animals. He wants to find a way to reverse this rapid cellular generation.
And during this time, we learn that Glen is outside because now he can come and go from his tent freely.
Yeah, he's out of the room.
So he's taking a walk with Carol.
Not really a walk. He's kind of seated, cross-legged on the grass, and they're having sort of a picnic. And she's sitting on the car. His voice is loud and booming. We can barely hear her.
And he can barely hear her.
Right. He's having some kind of chest pain issue, and he wishes he had died in the explosion. He kind of wryly notes here that back in school he was voted the man most likely to reach the top.
That's so funny.
This movie is laden with irony.
And Carol remains hopeful that they're going to find a cure.
You know, as long as he's still alive, there's a chance.
Glen doesn't share her positivity, but he does know one thing. I don't want to grow anymore.
Yeah, he says that a couple of times. That's my favorite line from this movie.
And then he wanders off.
After he wanders off, Linstrom basically materializes out of nowhere and asks Carol if Glen has any relatives. I guess this is sort of like a next of kin thing. And she's like, no, he has no one but me.
Yeah, again, continuing with his bedside manner there. Everybody is so sensitive about Carol's feelings in this situation.
Not really.
That was sarcasm.
Oh, okay. He doesn't want her there. That's basically why he's asking. He wants them to lift security so that she's allowed to leave.
But he precedes all this with, can I speak bluntly with you? Because apparently he hadn't been until this point.
Right. Look, lady, there's no hope. Get out of here.
And he thinks that it would be best for her to go.
Yeah, that she might be making it worse. I guess reminding Glen of everything that he can't do anymore, can't have anymore. His mental state is kind of unraveling here.
I think we should mention that Glen is wearing a diaper.
Yeah, well, he mentions it, but he calls it a sarong. So we visit him in his new tent home.
We see him crawling in, and he picks up the Bible.
It's about the size of a postage stamp, you know, in relative terms to us. And he tries flipping through it, but there's no way to read it. It's just minuscule. Someone brings him food.
Yeah, dinner is served, and he gets, I guess, a Cornish hen or something?
No, I think it's an entire Thanksgiving turkey. Well, that's what we're meant to believe, but...
Well, yeah, I know it's not a Cornish hen, but...
Well, whatever it is, it would fit in the palm of your hand. So it's about that big.
Well, in the palm of his hand.
Right. I'm talking relative terms here.
Yeah, this is... Apologize to our listeners. This is kind of hard to convey on an audio-only medium.
But watch the movie, and you'll see.
So this is Sergeant Artie.
He has the unenviable task of having to minister to Glen and feel the brunt of his anger. Artie has a newspaper just conveniently rolled up in his pocket. He chooses this moment to open it up and start reading.
And Glen asks what's happening in the world, and Artie says, hey, it's about you. So Glen demands to see it, and he picks up the newspaper, which is quite a bit larger than the Bible he tried reading earlier.
Yeah, this is the extra large type version of the Daily News. And the headline of that newspaper says, Man lives through plutonium blast.
So we're 3, 4, maybe 5 days after the blast, and it's finally making the news, even though the press was there.
Well, we forgot Glen's response, because it's pretty funny. So the headline says, Man lives through plutonium blast. And Glen says, You call this living?
Then he laughs, he coughs, and drinks water from a barrel.
He's got kind of sort of this Borscht Belt comedian timing, I think. It's kind of funny. So after he drinks his water, he says he has to wear this giant sarong, but luckily it's adjustable. So as he gets bigger, he can keep his giant man bits covered.
Either way, this makes Artie feel a little uncomfortable, and he asks if he could leave.
Yeah, and Glen is still on a tear. He's talking about, being a circus freak, and what would the circus barker say? See the amazing colossal man. And, so we finally have the title. He calls the soldier a freak and says, I'm not growing, you're shrinking.
This upsets Artie to no end, and he runs away.
I don't blame him, because this guy could squash him like a bug.
So it's time for a more scientific explanation to what is happening with Glen.
Can we put science in air quotes here? Because there's going to be like something very wrong is about to be said. Dr. Linstrom is talking to Carol, and he's got 3 charts of a man with his circulatory system visible.
So the first one is showing Glen pre-accident.
Yeah, a normal-sized man. Then we have like Glen where he is now, which is like supersized. And then I think the third one is...
when he's amazing colossal.
Yeah, projecting into the future when he's like 15 miles tall.
So what they realize is that his heart is growing at a slower rate than the rest of him. And the reason for this is...
the heart is just one cell. That's not true. The heart is comprised of many cells. It does have a special... behaviorally, it functions as one cell, but it is not just one cell. So...
but for the purposes of this film, it is just one cell.
It's not
or the science doesn't work.
Yeah, okay. The point is that his heart can't keep up with the rest of him. And it's, that's going to be the death of him.
And that's why he's having the chest pains. It all makes sense.
Carol asks why this is happening. And all he says was, I wish I knew. This Dr. Linstrom he's probably not used to talking to like family members.
He's like contracted to work with the Army, but he's not Army.
Right. So I don't know what his deal is, but he's just very blunt and
he's a specialist at the rehabilitation center.
Right, but he's not a specialist at the human. He may talk about the human heart, but he's got no heart.
Anyway, the prognosis is Glen has only days to live.
So Major Coulter is still working with animals, but he's got some new critters in the lab.
He's got an elephant and a camel.
What could those be for? Boy, I wonder.
And a circus tent. Maybe they have a side thing going.
The clowns will be next.
So that evening, Carol's in bed, and she hears Glen coughing and crying out.
So she must be pretty close.
And she goes out to check up on him.
He's wondering how big he's going to get before he finally dies. And he tells Carol to get lost. So everyone's telling her to go away.
Yeah, the purpose of this scene, it doesn't reveal anything. And I think it's just to show Glen's mental condition. He's not taking his situation well at all.
No. He's not a good sport about this, definitely.
So after he kicks her out, we learn the next morning that Glen has disappeared.
And unfortunately, he disappeared right at the moment when the docs have found the cure. Apparently, there's some kind of sulfide compounds that will stop the growth, and then his own pituitary glands should reverse the gigantism. And the way they show this is pretty funny. So, and they do this as like a big reveal. So we don't see what they're looking at. Major Coulter takes Dr. Linstrom over to his little animal farm, and we see in 2 little cages is a tiny little elephant and a tiny little camel. It's hilarious.
They know they have to administer the serum, and so they have already ordered the construction of a giant hypodermic needle.
Although when they have a consultation with the rest of the Army who are going to be doing the search, one of the officers says, whether or not Glen is dangerous, if Glen attacks them, they will drop him. So they'll try and capture him alive, but they're not going to risk their men to bring him in. And so they're going to start a search for Glen. They've got only 2 helicopters and only 1 helicopter pilot, very poor planning on the Army's part. But luckily, good old Dr. Linstrom can fly a helicopter. How handy.
Yeah, apparently he learned by sheer force of will.
Yeah, he's just like, I wanted to learn how to do it, so I did. Well, I want to learn how to do it too, so I'm going to. Mark my words.
So they fly around between Boulder and Las Vegas, but they can't find the 30-foot man anywhere.
I know. They can see anything on the ground. It's the desert. There's nothing to hide behind. They even show how it looks out the window. It's just nothing but scrub and sand. So who knows where he is? Oh, actually, someone does see him.
Yeah, he's seen while sitting in the middle of the road.
It's kind of hard to see him, though. He's kind of transparent. Just the effects are not great in this.
That's a different movie.
What?
The Amazing Transparent Man.
Oh, okay.
The car stops so they don't collide with the Amazing Colossal Man in the road. And there's a couple of dudes in this car.
Yeah, just a couple of locals driving around. And they're staring, kind of like saucer-eyed at this amazing colossal roadblock.
And the passenger vows never to drink again.
Yeah, he throws his bottle out I guess he's like chugging some whiskey on the road, as you do. So he throws his bottle out the window and you hear it crash.
I love the way the scene plays, just because it's thrown in there with the intentional humor, and it's so cheesy and so bad.
What's bad about
it's
the effects?
Oh, just the line.
Oh, right.
It's so was it cliche in 1957? I don't know, but it feels very Bert Gorton.
Right. It's kind of like an airplane, like I picked the wrong day to quit sniffing glue, that kind of thing. So
back at the rehabilitation center, everyone is discussing why they can't find Glen and how this could have been prevented.
Yeah, Linstrom's pretty cheesed off that they didn't chain down Glen, keep him confined for his own good. He's complaining while the sergeant is desperately trying to get a meal in right before bed.
Yeah, he has to finish his sandwich first.
And his coffee.
And he's
going to go to bed.
Yeah, and then he leaves like right in the middle of the conversation.
Yeah. So that's how much he cares.
Linstrom isn't sure that Glen could be saved if they're unable to find him. Which makes sense because that serum is supposed to be his only hope.
Right, and they have to give it to him, and which there's a whole lead up to that.
And the success or failure of this treatment depends upon how soon it can be administered.
Right. And so, with Glen running around on the loose, they're wasting time. Linstrom once again insists that Carol leaves, but Glen has been spotted. And so they send in the troops. Currently he weighs 18,000 pounds. And they warn that he might be mentally unstable at this point.
So they take off in their helicopter again, and we have Dr. Linstrom, we have Carol, and we have Major Coulter.
Yep, all riding together.
And Coulter is carrying what appears to be a giant hypodermic needle.
What's funny is they have the little finger holes, and they made those big too. I guess so Glen could inject himself.
Oh, that's for our benefit, so we would know what that was.
Oh, true. I mean, they could shoot it in with like a missile or something, couldn't they? Just like a little bottle rocket.
If you're ordering a giant hypodermic needle and you have the specs for it, it's going to look like a hypodermic needle at a different scale.
They warn the troops to stay like 50 feet away from him. Don't fire on him unless it's an emergency.
We have a cutaway to another newscast. H. Wells is now reporting that the FSOOE, that's the Flying Saucer Observers of Earth, have reported a 60-foot giant.
Those crazy so-and-sos. So, yeah, I think the news isn't taking this seriously yet.
And it was apparently reported by those two fellows who ran into Glen at the side of the road.
Right. But, instead of saying, well, you were drinking, so we're not going to believe you, it gets on the news.
Were those two people the Flying Saucer Observers of Earth?
No, this is like a big organization. This is like the Flat Earth Society.
Are they members or did they FSOOE just get wind of this?
Yeah, I think that's how it happened. Okay. And there wasn't, the internet back then, but word of mouth must have sufficed. Glen is moving towards Las Vegas. He's been spotted.
His first destination is the dunes.
Yeah, he looks like a hologram here, I have to say. But it's enough to scare the observers. A woman screams.
One woman in particular, yeah, she screams.
He moves on to the Riviera, where he kind of attracts a crowd. And the Riviera is kind of a hotel, right? It's not / casino, but it's not just a casino. And Glen turns into a peeping Tom.
Yeah, because right at his eye level, there's a woman in the bathtub.
And he's like very entranced by this sight. She doesn't notice at first. Like, how do you not notice? Giant pair of eyeballs outside your window? But he pokes in the window, and luckily she doesn't get slashed by broken glass. She just screams and then wraps herself in the shower curtain.
She immediately gets down in the tub, because it doesn't even seem like there's enough time to do that. Because imagine that you're in this situation, you're in the tub, something happens, you're scrambling to get out of the tub, you're not graceful.
You're not slipping on wet.
Yeah, I mean, this happens like, it's off screen, of course, because it's the 50s.
Yeah, no
but
boobs.
1 second she's in the tub, the next second she's outside the tub wrapped in the shower curtain.
Right, just so we don't behold her nudity. Glen moves on to, I don't know which club this was, but there's a giant crown on top. You know how Vegas has the kitschy signs. So he plucks this giant crown off the pillow that it's on, kind of contemplates wearing it. Maybe it's too big for him still.
So the crown doesn't maintain his interest very long. He puts it back where he found it, which I thought was a nice touch.
Yeah.
Then he heads over to the Silver Slipper.
The Silver Slipper has a giant silver high-heeled shoe as its signage. And he plucks that off the whatever pole that is holding it up.
And this whole time, this crowd is gathered around, trying to stay out of his way, but staying closer than they probably should.
They're curious. I mean, this never happened before.
And the police have been ordered not to shoot.
Yeah, they're just doing crowd control, basically.
And they're discussing it among themselves, and he's destroying property. Something has to be done. So one of them opens fire. And in his defense, he plucks a palm tree from the ground and throws it at the crowd, and they immediately disperse.
Don't blame them. He moves on to the Sands, where Danny Thomas is playing.
Danny Thomas is from my hometown of Toledo, Ohio.
Yeah, shout out to Toledo, where I also used to live. Now we're back with H. Wells, the newscaster. And lucky for us, he actually has a window on the strip from his studio.
Yeah, so he pulls back the curtain and we can actually see what's going on in the street. And there's Glen.
Yeah, his giant head appears next to a building.
As H. Wells is just commenting on what he's seeing, and we're seeing it right along with him.
Yeah, I guess the camera followed him. We don't see that. So Glen next hits the Pioneer. He takes the cowboy sign and crushes it.
Finally, the helicopter is close.
Yeah, and so they chase him to the Boulder Dam on the Arizona side. So shout out to Arizona.
The helicopter flies right up to his face and just hovers there.
It's really loud, and it's annoying him. He kind of yells at the helicopter.
It's like a fly to him, and he starts swatting at it.
Yeah, it has another view of his eyes, and he looks confused, and so that's what they see through the windshield of the helicopter.
So they hover there for a bit, and then decide, since he's swatting at them, it might be better for them to land.
Yeah, better to land yourself than to get smashed to the ground. They land by his giant foot, and Dr. Linstrom has a megaphone. He's telling Glen that they're trying to help him. And that's when they pull out the giant hypodermic needle.
They don't pull it out. Major Coulter has been carrying it the whole time.
Right.
Because it's giant. You can't really just stick it somewhere.
Okay, so that's when they decide to deploy the giant hypodermic needle.
And it's like a bee sting. Glen reacts unfavorably.
Yeah, he kind of, I want to say hulking out, but he's already hulked out. But it's that kind of, it angers him. And he wants to get revenge.
So he pulls out the needle, looks at it, and decides to do unto others. And he throws it like a dart right at poor Major Coulter.
Yeah, spears him right through the heart, and he's a goner.
And then he picks up a screaming Carol.
Yeah, a la King Kong and Fay Ray.
And heads back to the dam.
Right, so he's walking along the dam, kind of like a tightrope situation, like on the balance beam. And Dr. Linstrom, I guess they followed him. Carol wants him to put her down. Dr. Linstrom yells at him to put her down. So eventually he does.
Yeah, because they can't shoot him. They can't do anything while he has her in his clutches.
Right. So I guess with the last scrap of humanity he has, he decides to save her, to let her be.
So now that she's out of harm's way, they shoot him.
Yeah, and then he falls in.
He does kind of an ungraceful cannonball into the dam.
And everyone has a look-see to make sure that he's really gone, and he is. And that's it. That's the end. It's very abrupt, but it's over. Welcome back to the Amazing Colossal Man, the American International Podcast. Let's talk about the cast. In what other AIP movies will we see some of these people?
Well, Glen Langan, who played the Amazing Colossal Man, Glen Manning, was born and raised in Denver, Colorado, so this would have been kind of a homecoming for him. He had made his Broadway debut in 1940 in Glamour Preferred, and worked as a contract player with 20th Century Fox in the 40s. He didn't have a lot of leading roles, but there were a few, and he had an advantage because he wasn't called off to war when a lot of the leading actors at the time had been.
Oh, lucky him.
And he had previously appeared in Outlaw Treasure for American Releasing Corporation.
One thing he doesn't appear in is the sequel to this movie, War of the Colossal Beast. That role will be recast. So Cathy Downs, who played fiancée Carol, she was in Phantom from 10,000 Leagues and The Oklahoma Woman, which were released through the American Releasing Corporation, and also The She Creature, which is an AIP movie.
She might best be remembered today as having played Clementine Carter in My Darling Clementine by John Ford in 1946. It's a story of the gunfight at the OK Corral, and a very good movie if you haven't seen it.
She also died tragically young. She only lived to be 50 years old.
Yeah, she died from cancer in 1976 at the age of 50.
William Hudson, who played Dr. Paul Linstrom, was also in The She Creature.
Yes, he's best remembered as having played Ranger Clark in Rocky Jones' Space Ranger. And of special interest is that a year after The Amazing Colossal Man, he would play the husband of Allison Hayes in Attack of the 50-Foot Woman.
He has a thing for giants, I guess.
And of course we have Larry Thor as Major Eric Coulter, MD.
Yeah, we saw him in The Fast and the Furious.
He was Detective Sergeant in Fast and the Furious.
Detective Sergeant No Name. And he also appeared in Five Guns West, another American Releasing Corporation film, and Machine Gun Kelly.
As we mentioned earlier, The Amazing Colossal Man was based on the novel The Nth Man by Homer Eon Flint. James H. Nicholson had the rights to this and thought it would be a good counterpiece to The Incredible Shrinking Man, which Universal had just released. The Amazing Colossal Man was originally to be directed as a comedy by Roger Corman from a Charles B. Griffith script and was to star Dick Miller.
Can you imagine what that would have been like?
As a comedy, I'd be interested to see it because Dick Miller didn't do a lot of leads.
Yeah, and I think it would have been a lot more fun than this movie turned out to be. But Corman dropped out.
Bert I. Gordon came on board and started to rework the script, but Charles B. Griffith left. And then that's when Mark Hanna came in, and Mark Hanna was actually Charles B. Griffith's regular writing partner.
But I guess no hard feelings then for taking over. So Paul Blaisdell, who did the effects, designed and built all of the tiny-sized props used in this movie, and they also later appeared in the 1958 sequel, War of the Colossal Beast, via flashback footage. And they actually filmed this in Las Vegas and on the Hoover Dam. They didn't just fake all that. They're on location.
Well, a lot of it was faked, but...
Well, obviously, there wasn't really a 60-foot man. This came out on a double bill with Catgirl in 1957. It was the top portion of the bill. And it got pretty positive reviews, mostly for Glen Langan's performance. They called it an imaginative story premise, even though it was kind of a ripoff of another movie.
I think Glen Langan gives a very good performance in this movie, all things considered. Sure, he has to walk around in a sarong.
A diaper, basically.
And no hair. But he seems to be taking the material very seriously. When he's in pain, he actually looks like he's in pain. And he seems distressed when he still has his mental facilities about him.
Right. And, given that the fact that they didn't have a huge budget for this movie, they did really have to kind of focus on the psychological aspects of what it would be like to, be this giant mutant freak trying to live in a world with regular sized people. So I think in that point, in changing the focus, not making it a comedy, I think they, had that made it successful.
And this movie came toward the end of his acting career. He did a few films afterward over many, many years. He just wasn't working that regularly. And in a lot of ways, The Amazing Colossal Man is his legacy. There isn't a whole lot that he would have done that's going to be remembered, unfortunately.
Yeah. I first saw it as part of a Mystery Science Theater episode, and they make a lot of fun of, the guy in the diaper. And one of the writers, Mike Nelson, played Glen in a sketch and kind of batted the satellite of love around. But that was my introduction to this movie. So the first time I saw it was on Mystery Science Theater. And they also did War of the Colossal Beast, too. So when we get there, I've seen that, too. You want to talk about Bert I. Gordon?
Sure.
His initials are B.I.G., and I think he really took that to heart. A lot of his movies involve things that are too big for this world. Mutants, giants, freaks of all kinds. Things that are too big or maybe things that are too small, because he also did Attack of the Puppet People.
For AIP.
Yeah, for AIP. And Earth versus the Spider, and The Food of the Gods, Empire of the Ants.
For AIP. And Village of the Giants for another company.
And he also did The Cyclops and Beginning of the End. and
King Dinosaur was his first film.
Right. A lot of those, again, were on Mystery Science Theater. So I know Bert I. Gordon better than I knew most directors at one point.
Well, he has the fortunate or unfortunate distinction of having the most films presented on Mystery Science Theater, I believe.
Even more than the Gamera guy, I think. But yeah, I mean, the movies are ridiculous. But they're fun. So, you got to give him that. He didn't have much of a budget, but he had an imagination and he had a drive. And he just passed away recently. He lived to be 100. And we saw him talk a few years ago. And it was fun. He's a fun guy. He's told a lot of great stories. And it's just, you can fault his movies for being silly, but you can't fault them for not being entertaining.
Well, he was an innovator for sure. The special effects in his movies, he was doing things that nobody else had been doing.
Right. I mean, we look at him from a 2023 perspective, and it seems like, wow, these effects are terrible. But at the time, he was given what he had to work with. He did a good job.
Maybe they were terrible then, but there was nothing to compare them against. So by contrast, they were good.
Right. Then, suspend your disbelief and enjoy yourself. Why not?
So sure, we can see through the Amazing Colossal Man several times in this movie.
Could you have done it better?
It doesn't make him look any less amazing or colossal.
Right. Definitely is colossal. Okay, so now it comes down to the time where we tell how we really felt about this movie. And we have only 3 points on our scale, the AIP. Awesome, intermediate, or pathetic. And how would you grade this movie?
Well, I feel kind of bad about doing this because a few weeks ago, I gave an I to I Was a Teenage Werewolf, which is arguably the most famous title in the AIP catalog. But I'm going to give an A for awesome for The Amazing Colossal Man.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's cheesy. Obviously. Is it dated? Probably. There's some questionable science in this movie. And the way people talk to each other is a little unusual and not normal.
Yeah, it doesn't feel natural.
But I was never bored watching this movie. It goes by very quickly.
It's a very short movie. It's an hour and 20 minutes.
Well, that definitely helps, but so was I Was a Teenage Werewolf. So yeah, I'm going to give it an awesome for its entertainment value.
I think this is probably the first time I've ever disagreed with you, but I was going to go intermediate. And I almost verged on pathetic. And the reason why is because there are some amusing moments in this, and it's, you can take it seriously or you can view it as an oddity. But the ending is so abrupt and so tragic that it doesn't leave me feeling like I just enjoyed a movie. So watching Carol just see her fiance disappear into the waters of the Colorado River, to his certain death, and then the movie just ends, and it just makes me kind of miserable knowing that all this was for nothing. They tried to save him.
It is missing the final line from somebody, giving you that thing to think about.
Yeah, like he tampered in God's domain.
Yeah, that type of thing. It doesn't have that. It just, he's falling and screaming, and then it says the end. Right.
And so, that left kind of a bad taste in my mouth. Like overall, I do agree with you that effects were, for their time, fine. And the story was good. And it was entertaining up until then. But just kind of the ending left me just not wanting to recommend this movie.
If it had that line, it would be over. It would be done. But there's a sequel.
Well, but you wouldn't have known that at the time that a sequel was coming. I think back then you didn't expect a sequel for every movie like we do now.
But that's why there had to be a sequel, because they didn't end it properly.
Right. And, the sequel has its own issues. But, yeah, for this one, I'm going to give it the middle grade rating of intermediate, just because I needed more at the end. I needed something to make it all make sense, to make it all worthwhile. And that wasn't there.
That is fair. This is incredibly cheesy. Is it a good movie? No, this is a very bad movie, but in the best possible way.
Right. We don't rate them on how Oscar worthy they are. We rate them on how they make us feel.
And as I mentioned earlier, Glen Langan's performance is above and beyond the material that he's given.
Oh, absolutely. I kind of think Cathy Downs is a little weak as the fiance, where she's very intrepid, but I don't know. They kind of talk down to her like she's an idiot. And
she's not a very striking character.
No. I do admire her spunk and her willingness to not let this go.
And her optimism in this situation, because she's always hopeful.
I think it would have been more realistic, though, to see her kind of having her doubts and what she's going through. But she's just basically a functionary for Glen's story.
Well, I hate to say it, but that's probably because this is Bert I. Gordon.
That's true. Yeah, the secret lives of women are not something we investigate. Not in the 50s.
So I would say that probably does it for our Amazing Colossal episode of the American International Podcast. I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot. And until next time, we'll meet you at the drive-in.
Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.